nasty.
And I think the general public feeling towards, let's say, even personal injury, whether you're a doctor doing personal injury or an attorney specializing in personal injury, it's just a hard sell. And I think it's because there's just a lot of bad stuff that's out there. Traditionally, those doctors do not like, and the profession as a whole does not like dealing with liens, is because they've been burned so bad.
This one goes out to all of the attorneys and chiropractors out there. On this episode, we have my good friend, Dr. Kent Choi. He is the manager of a network called the Ichthus Injury Network, which is a network of chiropractors that specialize in personal injury matters. In this episode, we talk about a lot of great information that if you're a chiropractor or you're an attorney within the PI space, you should listen to this, because we talk about how you can improve your settlements, improve your results, and if you're a chiropractor, what you should be keeping in your records and how you can improve with your relationship with attorneys, and on top of that, improve how you can make sure that you get paid properly and how you can handle personal injury cases the right way. Go ahead and tune in today. There's a lot of great information here, and if you have any questions, please make sure to reach out to either me or Dr. Choi. We would love to help you and make sure that you help you and your clients and your patients with all personal injury matters. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Nasty Truth Podcast. Today, we have on here one of my really close friends, Dr. Kent Choi. Dr. Choi is an amazing chiropractor in Southern California. He has several offices, one located in Orange, one located in Cerritos. He's also the owner and manager of a network of chiropractors called the Ichthus Injury Network. This network has been around now for almost half a decade, and he helps manage a lot of wonderful chiropractors that I know my team prefers to work with every single time, and a lot of attorneys that I prefer to work with, or that I work with on a regular basis, they prefer to work with his network too. Dr. Choi has been a chiropractor now since 2000, so over 20 years now. He went to Southern California University of Health Sciences. He's also a Bruin, so he went to UCLA, so go Bruins, sorry USC, and he has been someone that has been within the chiropractic space for many years now. He helps guide a lot of chiropractors, he teaches them the right way to do things, and he's somebody that I respect a lot because he also helps attorneys on the other end, and he recognizes this symbiotic relationship between attorneys and chiropractors within our space specifically when it comes to personal injury matters, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know him. So Dr. Choi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. So Dr. Choi, I want to talk about today, you are a chiropractor, right? And you've been doing this now for over 2 decades. What got you into being a chiropractor?
That's a great question. I was a pre-med student at UCLA, and I met my wonderful wife there, and we were both pre-med, and she decided to go on to optometry school, and I figured, I have pretty good grades. I need to pursue something in medicine. And what happened was I wasn't so sure what to do right after school. What I did was I had some part-time jobs doing personal training. I had a part-time job helping youth kids at a small local church in Fullerton that I attended. And what had happened was the timing was they needed someone to help them. The church needed someone to help the kids learn on Sunday. And the youth pastor at the time had quit, and the timing was where the parents came to me. It was a small church, maybe only about 15 kids. And they said, the kids like you. They need you to step up and keep teaching them. And I said, well, sure, I'll do it. And they said, well, if you need to do that, you're going to have to get some training. And I went, what does that mean? Well, I had to enroll in some graduate school. So I enrolled in a local school to where I was living, Biola University. They have a graduate program there. And while I was going there, doing my training in that graduate program, I needed another job. Because what I was getting paid as a monthly stipend through the church was not going to even cover half my bills. So I went back in the day to the Times and the Orange County Register in the classified section, and I'm like, well, let me do something dealing with medicine because that's where my background's at. And then I actually saw an ad that said chiropractic assistant. Now, what's crazy about that story is my wife grew up, or my girlfriend at the time grew up in Fountain Valley. And out of all the ads that were out there, this office happened to be in Fountain Valley. So I'm thinking, this is really awkward, right? And then I went ahead and did that interview with the doctor there and I didn't even know what a chiropractor was. That's the irony. I'm at UCLA studying pre-med physiology, and I'm looking for something medical. I did a lot of personal training. I have my degree in physiological science.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I need something related to medicine, training, physical type of activity and work. And then a chiropractic assistant came up, and I interviewed. And I'll never forget this. After the interview, they said, we've been in practice for X amount of years. I think it was about 10 years at the time.
Yeah.
We've never hired a male assistant.
How
I'm
interesting.
like, that's fine. So I took off, and 2 days later, we want you to come back for a second interview. And then I go back for a second interview, and you're hired. So I was a chiropractic assistant for about 3 years.
Yeah.
And I finally said to myself, wow, this is awesome. The doctor that I was working for was financially very secure, but he was helping a lot of people.
Yeah.
And everyone seemed to love him. It wasn't like, I hate coming here. It's like, I can't wait till I get my next appointment. And I thought, well, what a great profession.
Yeah.
Being able to help people and getting paid for it.
Yeah.
So then I had all the grades, called the local schools, and I enrolled in the Los Angeles College of Chiropractic, which happened to be not too far from Fountain Valley, probably no more than a 40-minute drive.
Yeah.
And I enrolled, had all the grades, all the prereqs, because I was pre-med.
Yeah.
Got through the program, which was, for those that don't know, it's 10 trimesters. So I went through a 5-year program, which is straight through with no summer break. And we have 7 boards we have to pass, and I got through them, luckily.
Yeah.
I felt pretty confident. I had a pretty good background and got through all 7 boards. And then I graduated in December 2000, and I got my license after getting all the boards done April of 2001. I actually had it in my hand and started from scratch at that point.
Why do people give so much scratch to chiropractors, right? I feel like they're just not treated the same as a medical doctor, but you guys almost go through the same amount of schooling. You guys go through a lot of the same rigorous testing, right? You have your own boards. You have your own specialized, requirements. Why do you think that people just treat them so differently?
I think it's really about, reputation through word of mouth. I think a lot of, for example, I do a lot of personal injury, and some of my good friends, you including one of them, very respectable personal injury attorneys that really care about their clients, care about taking care of the providers that take care of their clients. And I think the general public feeling towards, let's say, even personal injury, whether you're a doctor doing personal injury or an attorney specializing in personal injury, no matter how good we are as people, it's just a hard sell. And I think it's because there's just a lot of bad stuff that's out there. And so the ones that do it right, it's very difficult to overcome some type of reputation. For example, your question regarding chiropractors, people don't even know how much schooling we had to go through. Yeah. People don't know that we spend countless hours on x-rays and MRIs and touching people's spines, and that's why chiropractors spend quite a bit of time actually putting their hands on their patients to get a feel of what's going on. Yeah. And I think it's about just the bad rap we get because maybe years and years past, the education wasn't as strict. Yeah. It wasn't as regulated. Maybe there are providers out there that are maybe overselling what it is that we learn in school. In other words, trying to fix everything. Yeah. And, the school that I went to, we practice evidence-based medicine. So we basically are always looking into the current studies that are out there in medicine. Yeah. There's something called the JMPT, Journal of Manipulative Physiological Therapeutics, which is basically a peer-reviewed journal with double-blind studies that talk about the medical literature, the current literature on chiropractic and how it helps certain conditions based on very, very scientific studies. And we're very well known for lower back, helping patients with lower back complaints. There are some studies out there with blood pressure, some neck pain, but I really think it's about the reputation that's been going on for the longest time. But some of my dearest friends in the medical profession, neurologists, neuroradiologists, orthopedic spine surgeons, pain management physicians, family physicians, I've developed a very good relationship with them, and they didn't even know what I did.
Yeah.
They just think that, what we do is we do spinal adjustments and we fix everything with that. But what I've learned and what gives me so much satisfaction in personal injury is we are pretty much caretakers of that client of yours. Yeah. And we're equipped to say, okay, this is beyond my training. Yeah. You need to get over to this person or that person. Yeah. Versus saying, we could fix everything.
No, for sure.
You got a concussion, a brain injury, let me do something to help you. So with personal injury, we treat the patient first, and we're able to get them connected to the right specialists that we're not trained in treating. And I think that builds that reputation. So now medical doctors in all specialties and subspecialties, personal injury attorneys are now seeing us as being just really good doctors that are here to help anyone that is in need and that is not afraid to actually take that risk on a lien. We take a huge business risk on a lien. That's why a lot of lawyers, when they call some doctors, are like, oh, I ain't going to do this on a lien. Pay me right now. We're going to get the best care for your clients and refer to other specialists that are the best in their fields, in my opinion, that take on liens, which is a free way of medicine because we're not regulated by all these insurance companies telling us what we can and cannot do.
Yeah, so I mean, for those of you that don't know what a lien is, typically when you go to a doctor, you're either going to pay cash, you're going to pay using your insurance, or you're going to work on a lien basis. Typically in personal injury matters, when it comes to working on a lien basis, it means that the attorney and the doctor are working similarly. It means we're going to get paid at the end of the case through the settlement, but there's a lot of benefits to working on a lien. One, with working on a lien, the insurance company is not dictating the treatment, which means that they're only going to do what's medically necessary, which means they're going to give the worst care and the least amount of care. When you treat on a lien with a doctor like Dr. Choi, he's going to give you the golden treatment. He's going to treat you good. He knows he's going to get taken care of at the end of the case, and he's going to make sure that he's giving you what's necessary to get better instead of just what the insurance company is barely allowing him to do when they go through insurance. So like, what are the benefits that you think are for using a lien versus going through insurance or getting cash paid?
Well, I'm one of the few providers that actually are surviving in the insurance and HMO system. And one of the things that, for example, if I have a patient that has a certain PPO and they are not involved in a motor vehicle crash, and then sometimes even if they are, but let's say they have a complaint of, I hurt my neck, whether it's some type of motor vehicle collision, slip and fall, or just playing sports, and for a week now my neck's been really sore and my left arm's been numb and tingling. Well, a lot of times if you're going to go ahead and call their insurance company and say, we have someone here that for a week now they've had neck pain with on and off numbness and tingling, it's very difficult for them to authorize the actual MRI if that's what's necessary, because that would be one of the ways we can evaluate why they're having that numbness and tingling. And so a lot of times what you'll get is pushback and say, well, doctor, we need to get some conservative treatment in. And it's almost like a 6-week window on the button. It's almost like they read it off a screen. And I've come across this. And literally when you call after the 6th week to the very day, they put the order in, and all of a sudden it's authorized at the MRI center. Now, when we have someone that gets involved in a motor vehicle crash, I'm allowed to go ahead and say, here's what you need as Mr. and Mrs. Patient. I'd like to get something done for you like an MRI or an X-ray or a CT scan to be able to find out if there's any type of injury that I'm going to be dealing with that I may be able to help. Or I may send you somewhere else right away because it's not something I can treat, at least at this time. And to me, it's very freeing. I'm not having to think about getting authorization other than doing what I need to do for the patient.
Yeah. So, I mean, like basically when dealing with insurance, it almost seems like dealing with a bureaucracy. You got to check your, dot your I's, cross your T's, check your marks to make sure that you're doing what they need to get your client treatment. But it doesn't actually do what's best for the client every single time. And so that's why a lot of times we recommend to work on liens. So also part of the reason we recommend to work with doctors like Dr. Choi. What I want to talk about today, so what we want to really focus on is I want to talk about how we can specifically help attorneys and chiropractors in their relationship with each other with personal injury matters. I know we could sit here all day and talk about spine health, and you're obviously a specialist in the field, but I want to talk about today is specifically, first I want to start with, can you please tell us about Ichthus injury? I want to hear how that started and what's it about, and then I want to talk about these best tips that we can give attorneys and chiropractors when it comes to working together in the personal injury space. And let's try to stay focused there today, because I know we can give a lot of good stuff.
I love it. Let's take on the first half of that question, which is Ichthus.
Yeah.
What is Ichthus about? Well, Ichthus, outside of the deep meaning behind it, which we could probably go over on another podcast, is it came about this way. I know my profession, whether it's the chiropractic profession or medical profession, they generally struggle with dealing with PI attorneys and patients that have treatments that they're doing on a lien to get paid. The biggest frustration that a lot of my colleagues have had over the years, some so bad that they've stopped taking liens.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't pay me today, or you don't have health care insurance or what's called med pay on your auto policy, and I can't feel like I'm going to be guaranteed some compensation and not having to wait a year or 2 years or 3 years or never get paid.
Yeah.
That's the frustration that gets some doctors out of dealing with motor vehicle crashes or slip and falls of that nature.
Yeah.
So understanding that the chiropractic profession traditionally those doctors do not like, and the profession as a whole does not like dealing with liens, is because they've been burned so bad.
Yeah.
It's pretty much, we treat the patient, we help them. Let's say we have a bill that's somewhat reasonable, $3,000 or $4,000 after several months of treatment. Something we spent a lot of time and money and overhead helping that person, and the patient and the client feels much better. Sometimes it's a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, and at best, the average collections on that might be half your bill.
Yeah.
So if you take into consideration the overhead that you've paid and the time factor, it's almost a negative business payment, right? And then you don't realize it till after you've tried it for a few years. So a lot of the chiropractors would come to me frustrated because my story is, I love doing personal injury.
Yeah.
I have great relationships with lawyers. It wasn't always like that, Joe. I mean, I would say in my 20 years of practice, if you came to me and I was sitting here 10 years ago, we're not having this type of conversation.
No, for sure.
Even I would even be, to be transparent, even about 6 years ago, this conversation would not be, I think, what it's going to turn out to be.
Yeah.
So because it's such a difficult aspect of practice on the business side, and we'll talk about this in a bit, even on the medical side, how we deal with injuries and how we document and how we do that right. It's been so frustrating for chiropractors to deal with these liens and deal with, whether it's directly with the insurance company or attorneys that tend to just drag out these claims and not even pay us where we can cover our overhead. No. Doctors came to me and I explained to them what the key matters were that I was able to overcome in my career. And share with them, these are the reasons why I'm successful relative to what you think should be done, because they weren't successful in their minds. And I slowly started growing a gathering of chiropractors. And I grew it very quickly for a very nominal fee to like 77 members within like a year.
That's amazing.
And it just, but it consumed my time. It consumed my time. And so what I did was to make it an official, this is not a casual meeting where we just talk about things. Let's make it an official, like, business matter. Let's go ahead and incorporate. Let's get legal advice about how we can do this legitimately. let's go ahead and make an educational group where I am getting paid a set fee, monthly fee, whether they have 0 referrals or $1 million a year in referrals, and they pay for education. So I basically lost about 2/3 of my members as soon as the fee became somewhat substantial. And we won't talk about that today in terms of the fee. But what happens is you get a lot of people that were kind of following along at a very, very reasonable, small fee. And then once you bring it up to something that might cause someone to think about it, then you lose 2/3 of the crowd.
But you know what? I know what your fee is, and I don't mind you sharing. I believe it's $500 a month.
Yeah, it's $500 a month, and we do weekly on Wednesday nights. We do webinars, Zoom calls where we teach medicine. We teach, okay, this is what an MRI is supposed to show, and this is how we document it, and this is what it might mean for your client. Last week we had some great optometrists on the webinar talking about eye injuries. When does an attorney or any type of doctor, specifically the chiropractors on the call, what do we look for when we talk about some type of injury related to the eye, and when do we need to refer out?
Yeah, but I mean, for those of you that think that's a substantial fee, I kind of want to talk about that for a second. So I only use ICHTHYS for all of my cases, okay? So, I have a couple hundred cases a year. I know that many attorneys in my network only use ICHTHYS in your network. If you get 1 or 2 referrals from Dr. Choi for cases because you're good, you know what you're doing now, we trust you, you're going to make that money back immediately, and you're going to make it back, multiple times over the next couple years or however long you're in the program. But on top of that, you're also getting education. You're getting a chance to also network with attorneys. Like I attend a lot of the events that Dr. Choi has on a regular basis. You're getting a chance to be affiliated with some of the best doctors and some of the best attorneys within Southern California. So that ROI comes. And I also want to comment too on what you said about attorneys and chiropractors. A lot of chiropractors do get burned by attorneys. And, my initial thoughts, what I want to comment on that, and no offense to any of the attorneys out there, but a lot of attorneys just don't know how to manage their cases the right way. And that's why at the end of the case, on a case where you should be paying your chiropractor at least $75, $80, if not the entire bill, you're asking him for a 75% reduction. It's because you probably suck at your job. And I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but you should not be getting a $5,000 settlement on a case where the medical bills are reasonable and there's $4,000 in medical bills. It means you're either running a mill where you're settling immediately because you don't have the time to deal with these cases, or you're not properly managing the cases and having good doctors that help you manage these cases. So what I can say is, since I've started working exclusively with ICHTHYS on most of my cases, is my settlement amounts have not doubled or tripled because these settlements are now going through the right processes. They're going with the right doctors. They're getting the right guidance. And a lot of it starts with how you manage the case. You could have a case with the best of injuries. If you don't send them to the right doctors and talk to the right people and treat with the right people, you're going to be, up S Creek without a paddle all day long. And so it's important to work with doctors that know what they're doing. So like you were saying, your fee is a couple $100, you provide education, and you specifically help doctors, which I think is the most important thing. You help them do their medical records the right way. And I kind of want to let you talk about, how do you help them specifically in that aspect, and what do you do to assist them with that?
Yeah, so this is the $1 million question for providers and the unknown for lawyers, because I've known hundreds of lawyers over the years, and I kind of don't blame the lawyers that might not have a great handle on their cases, because they're usually dealing with substandard medical record keeping. The running joke with one of my other lawyer friends is they had a Northern California doctor send them a box full of files. Literally, it's like 500 pages.
Jesus.
And literally each day service had probably 5 pages to it, and it was like 100 days of treatment.
Oh my God.
It's just kind of like the running joke right now. And then the other extreme you get, so first of all, no one's going to ever read 500 pages. No one.
Dude, yeah.
No one will. They'll read maybe the first 2 pages and they'll kind of be like, well, if it's going to look like this, I'm not going to read the next paragraph.
Yeah.
And then on the other extreme, because I do a lot of consulting on medical record keeping, I'm going to tell a potential chiropractor, well, let me just redact all the private information, just send me kind of what you believe is wrong with your patient in a special format, and that's something that we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But the medical record keeping of those prospective chiropractors that might want to be interested in learning from me, they're all over the place. Yeah. They're from literally just dozens and dozens, maybe the average is 30 pages on a file. And then on the other extreme, I see, let's say 5 visits per page, but it's all crosses and circles and numbers and X's. And it's like, even as someone that's seen some of these paperworks before, I still don't know what's wrong with the patient. I just think they need to be in the hospital when I look at some of those things. And I can't imagine any decent attorney on the plaintiff or defense side, or even an insurance adjuster, be able to understand either extreme. So I don't blame the lawyers, nor do I blame the doctors, because no one's presented to them, here are ways you can do it.
Yeah, and
right?
I want to make a comment on that too, because I think a lot of chiropractors forget, when you send me records, I'm not a doctor. I now have been doing this long enough that I understand many of the terms, and I now have learned many of the terms due to attending multiple conferences, webinars. But unless you're somebody like me who starts your own firm and really dives deep into learning the medicine, and like somebody who like litigates this stuff, a lot of times the attorneys don't know what you're saying. They don't know what you wrote. Many times I can't read what you wrote, right? Like these are just like minuscule problems, but you have to remember that the person you're giving it to, and many times the adjusters you're giving it to, have a very limited medical training. And so if your records are not going to be beneficial to the case, and they're not something that people can easily understand, you're killing it, not just for the client, but for the attorneys, for the entire matter itself. And so sometimes, like you've told me many times, less is more, and putting it in English is also very beneficial. But I'll let you continue. What are things that you think are really good?
So to be consistent as medical providers is our record keeping has to be consistent. So in other words, what I see with a lot of providers that I think is a huge mistake is they'll show me these multiple pages of medical record keeping for a car crash or a lien case.
Yeah.
And then I'll look at their cash patient that pays them $50, $60, $70, $80, and it's literally no paperwork.
Yeah.
And then and on a med legal perspective, if obviously they get into some kind of car crash and there's legal action that's taken, my understanding is when you subpoena records, it all shows up.
Yeah.
And how do you explain no record keeping or chicken scratch because someone's paying you a cash fee, which is substantially lower than what a lien amount is, which is another talk in itself.
Yeah.
Then you end up, then someone that's reviewing the car accident case is like, what's going on here? Yeah. So I think for a doctor to be credible, it starts as simple as, what do your medical records look like across the boards?
Yeah.
And if you have a doctor saying, are you talking about an HMO, PPO, cash, workers' comp? Yeah, all of it. Oh, well, if it's this or this, it changes. Now, to some degree, I kind of agree with certain HMOs require certain paperworks.
Yeah.
But in terms of the medical record keeping outside of the required paperwork should look the same.
Yeah.
So I have HMO patients where I'm going to have those medical records done the same way as, let's say, an injury lien case.
Yeah.
But in addition, for the HMOs, I have to send another piece of paperwork that they require that's specific to my contract with them that they require. But the actual note taking is the same. And to the point of what note taking is this. This is something we learn at school, and I believe it's in medical school, chiropractic school, any type of program where you're seen as, let's say, a primary care treater is, you want to give your notes in a very organized fashion called a SOAP note. And that's an acronym.
Yeah.
ICHTHYS is an acronym too, but again, that's an hour conversation later. But the SOAP note is an acronym for the S is the subjective section. Basically, if you get into a car crash, Joe, and I say, Attorney Nazarian, I'm sorry to hear that you were involved in a rear ender the other day. Mm-hmm. Can you please tell me your story of what happened?
Yeah.
The key here is this. I have to be able to screen all that information you give. And there's two extremes. We got one patient that's not going to talk.
Yeah.
Because maybe they're hurt, maybe they're shy, maybe they're scared of the doctors, their blood pressure, off the roof, the white coat syndrome. So I'll have to go ahead and lead your hand through the important questions so I can figure out what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
The other extreme is you're going to get someone that just won't stop talking.
Yeah.
Now, respectfully, we don't tell them to stop talking, but we still have to screen through all the noise, which is, okay, he or she is telling me 1,000 things, but I need to make sure to filter that information and focus on what that collision may or may not have done to this individual in front of me, so I can focus on my exam. So the point is the subjective section, which is the S in the SOAP notes, is what the patient will tell me. But the trick is we have to be able to masterfully, in my opinion, artfully, in a very artistic manner, be able to take what's credible, what's important, and put that in your medical records, because no one expects you when they go to the ER. If that person is talking about a million things, you're never going to see an ER record with more than 2 sentences, it seems like, in the subjective section. So we want to be credible as doctors, not only what we present, but also what the client or patient presents, and it comes pretty much within the first 3 or 4 sentences of the SOAP notes.
Yeah.
What we find in a lot of medical record keeping is subpar SOAP note taking, which is the subjective, which is, it almost seems like they had a video camera, they were reviewing the video camera footage, and now they're writing every little detail that the video camera shows.
Yeah.
But as you know, with a lot of these medical records on the extreme end of detail, we don't know if that happened. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what if doctor number 2 has a different story and doctor number 3 has a different story and your client in deposition has a different story? Now what's the truth? And we want the truth, right? We want the simple truth of someone was hurt, these are the injuries, these are the treatments that were reasonable, and there needs to be a fair settlement based on that information. The second part of the SOAP note is the objective section, the O.
So I want to talk about that real quick. So with the subjective section, like you said, it's all about like putting the right information. Sometimes I get records and I'm like, why did the doctor write this in there? And you guys have no idea. Like you'll write like something about like them walking their dog, or like something like, you know, they went and picked up their kids, like little things that sometimes actually hurt the case later on down the road, because you might have put something in there not thinking it's actually going to hurt the case. And I think I want to point out 2 things. One is, you pointed out, and tell me if I'm wrong, you want to be consistent. All of your records want to be consistent across the board, right? You don't want to be doing things differently. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. You know, you want to make sure that everything is staying along the lines, because when we do subpoena records, or when the defense subpoenas records, they're going to see you did it one way for a PI case, you did it one way for another case, and they're going to see that also that the inconsistency of the way that you charge and you bill. We'll get into bill later on down the road, but that's good. So consistency is super important. And then also just make sure you're very aware of what you're putting in the record, especially in the subjective section, because like Dr. Choi pointed out, you're getting it from the client's giving you info, but you don't have to put every single word that they say in the records. Get what's important, and I think that starts too with just like an attorney. We ask the right questions. You need to also ask the right questions so that you can get the information that's needed for this report.
100%. And one thing that I'll talk about, the 2 words I'm going to talk about, if I don't talk about it enough, maybe you can remind me, but the 2 things that are very important in a PI case or any case is, number 1, credibility. The doctor's records need to be credible, right? What they write reflects credibility of the doctor, and it reflects the credibility of the client or the patient. And not only is credibility important, now this is something that's very tricky and very few doctors understand this, is your records need to be neutral. In other words, whatever the doctor writes has to be neutral. In other words, if you as a plaintiff attorney read it, you see in those records there's a doctor that's helping someone that is claiming to be injured. If you're a defense lawyer reading those records, you're reading a doctor that's trying to help someone that claims to be injured. In other words, those records, if they look neutral, you have both sides conceding to, okay, this doctor is credible and it's neutral. We're going to go ahead and just bypass this doctor and not have to question his credibility or being biased one way or the other. And let's move on to another matter to get this case resolved. So for example, where you brought up the subjective section is, I see records where the doctor will write, the patient was at a stop sign, and in their rear view mirror, they saw the person texting, not paying attention, and hit him at 30 miles an hour without even flinching. I mean, even if the patient states that, doesn't it seem like that patient is kind of advocating for their own injuries in a way that is, I don't think it's necessary. And a doctor saying that almost seems like, okay, well, we need to put something in there to show, you know, how bad the person behind them was as a driver, and they need to pay. I just think that's ridiculous. I think the doctor would just say the person was at a stop and stated that they got rear-ended. Well, and then you focus on the important medical stuff.
I couldn't agree more, because not only when you put that in there, you're basically now writing a statement on behalf of the plaintiff, which can be used against them later on down the road. And if they miscommunicated something to you, or you wrote something down the wrong way. I mean, I just had a case the other day, which we got killed because one of our ladies, she slipped and fell, and she broke her leg and she broke her right arm. She said it felt like somebody sat on her, but she said that to the doctor in the ER, and the doctor in the emergency room wrote in the records that somebody sat on her and broke her arm, even though that was not the case whatsoever. So, like, you have to remember, everything you put in these records, many a times this is our entire case. Medical records, demand letter, because 99% of cases never get to see before a jury. So it's all about, like Dr. Choi was saying, consistency, credibility, but also just putting what's needed in there. Don't put everything. It's not your job to fact determine what happened in the accident. Your job is, there was an accident. I am helping the client, and I am helping this patient, and that's what really matters. It is not that they got rear-ended, somebody was texting. The adjuster does not care about your opinion there. They're just going to use that against us and against the patient. So I'll let you continue.
And again, the doctors don't know any better, because they may be attending seminars where they're teaching you, you got to say everything that the patient tells you, no matter what you think about it. Just write it all down. And the irony is, I see it happening right in front of me. And, I get a lot of pushback from some colleagues of mine, because they're like, you know what? You're not being a great doctor because you're actually kind of leaving stuff out. I'm like, well, I'm going to agree to disagree with that. I'm a very thorough listener. Yeah. And I'm going to go ahead and put what I believe is to be important for the patient's injury documentation, right? Just like, and I always use the extreme example, you go to the emergency room and you might tell that ER doctor 20 minutes of things that are wrong with you. And you go, let's look at these records. And it's like, oh, they have whiplash to their neck, go see the PCP, take some muscle relaxers. And you're like, what happened to all the other things that they talked about? Well, when we're seeing, 30, 40 patients a day, and sometimes I have 4 or 5 new car accidents coming into my office a day. I mean, if I had one patient every 3 hours, I would probably sit there and listen to them and show that compassion. But the truth is, as providers, we don't have the luxury of giving everyone 2 hours of our time.
No, I agree.
We have to run a business, but yet not compromise quality. And that's an art in itself. When you can get a doctor's office efficient enough where there's people going in and out and quality hasn't been compromised. And I'm able to accomplish that in my office. I had 2 new car accident patients come in today, and I had probably 4 or 5 patients in between those new car accident patients coming in, and everyone left, maybe waited 7 minutes at the most for me, because my staff and I are all on the same page, and we're here to run an efficient practice, and most importantly, help that patient that's injured without having them waste 30, 40 extra minutes because we're not running an efficient practice. The second part of the SOAP note.
I want to make a comment you made real quick. You talked about, like, a lot of times when people get into accidents, if somebody, a layperson, is listening to this and you get in an accident and you go to your primary care physician, no offense to your MD, getting better from an accident is work. If all your MD is doing is giving you painkillers and saying get out the door, they didn't actually help you. All they did was mask your actual injury with drugs so that you don't actually take the time to get physically better. Make sure you always go to a chiropractor and get the treatment you need, because many times that is the diagnosis. Many people call a PI attorney, well, I went to the emergency room, they gave me Norcos. Great. Guess what? They didn't actually help you with anything. They just masked your pain, and they're hoping you're going to get better. But if you got hit, you're going to have injuries that you need to deal with through chiropractic, physical therapy, or different types of treatments.
Part of my training program, sorry to interrupt, but part of my training program and teaching program, having done thousands of cases over the last even 5 or 6 years, is seeing so many different injuries and working with so many different specialists that there's very few times I'll see a new client of yours or another attorney and be like, I haven't seen this injury or complaint before. So I almost have memorized all the different codes that I need to do, put on paper, and the questions to ask without compromising quality. And the key is objective findings. In other words, and we're getting into the objective section now, which is if someone says to me, Dr. Choi, my neck is killing me and my whole right arm is numb, I will document that in this subjective section. It doesn't go in my objective section because I can't objectify numbness and tingling. You know, unless I have a procedure where I need to run a pinwheel down their arm. I close your eyes and I'm going to run this down your arm, and I'm running it down and I'm telling them I'm going to run this down your arm. They're saying, oh, okay, let me know when you run it down my arm. Now I'm like, I'm not the right doctor for you. You need to go get to the ER right now because you might have some type of spinal cord or nerve, you know, severance where you can't feel your arm anymore. So there are ways we can objectively identify a serious complaint by using certain types of test procedures, but most patients that have those serious injuries aren't going to be at our office. They're going to be in the ER, urgent care at the hospital, or to their neurosurgeon.
And that's because they know, or just like because it's that?
Well, I do believe, and I hate to say this to doctors in general, but I truly believe, being in practice for over 20 years, the patient has this sixth sense that something's wrong with them. Whether it's like, unfortunately, you know, cancer, something's really going on, but they just kind of don't listen to their inner voice. Or I've been into a car wreck and something's not right with me. They know more than the doctors do. And I rarely in my last 20 years have a patient that's come to my office after they just said, you know what, I think something's really wrong, but I decided not to go to the emergency room or urgent care center. They've already gone. Very few patients come to me where the car flips a few times and they can't feel their arm. They're like, hey, I think a chiropractor is going to help me. That's not happening. They're already in the emergency room getting CT scans and everything to check out that nothing's been broken and things of that nature. So the objective section is someone tells me something and this subjective, then my goal is to go ahead and try to qualify that through my examination. In other words, I'm a firm believer that if someone says, Dr. Choi, it's my neck that hurts and it goes down my arm, or not the arm, and I say, by the way, you're in a pretty good wreck. Do you have any lower back pain or pain down your legs? And like, nope. I'll probably spend a minute checking their back, and if I don't find anything, it's done. I don't need to make something out of nothing. But point being is, I like my examination time to be focused on what I believe their subjective complaints are focusing on, with that rare exception that maybe they are in so much pain in one area of their body that until that area actually starts feeling a little bit better, they don't feel the second area, especially if there's a collision that would be like, whoa, you're telling me your neck is the only thing that hurts and your car looks like that, even though it's not always true that property damage correlates to injuries, because we've had plenty of patients with a scratch on their car and they have legitimate injuries that we can objectify through either x-ray studies or MRI studies to show there's some inflammatory process here, and this is not something that was there before a quote-unquote incident complaint, right?
I want to just make a quick comment about that, but I want to let you continue on the objective. Look, guys, if you get an accident where it's small scratches on the car or very minor, remember that these vehicles are designed now, they're designed differently now. You're meant to absorb the impact, and what happens is these vehicles are built so well, there just isn't a lot of damage now. So there can be severe injury to a client even when there's minimal property damage to your car. Do not dismiss these cases. Do not treat them like they're small cases. Listen to your clients and have them go go to a doctor that is objectively going to check about their injuries. If you don't do that, you're doing a huge disservice. I know one of the people in our field that's like a specialist in this, Brett Sachs is one of my friends, and like I've gotten huge settlements myself too on cases where there's just almost no damage that you can see on the car. You don't want to dismiss these cases. You want to work them up the same way, because injuries and pain is subjective, and you want to make sure that you objectively get an evaluation about what's going on to the client.
You mentioned Brett. I know he's your mentor. He's a young attorney that I think is brilliant, and I know we've both learned a lot from him. He's the only lawyer that I know that actually had quoted this and says, you need to treat, you meaning providers, you need to treat the patient and not the property damage.
Yeah.
Right. We treat the patient, not the property damage. And that's what I meant about credibility.
Yeah.
If the patient or your clients are credible, in fact, I'll even tell you this, Joe, I do not even look at pictures of the car.
Yeah.
It's only when the patient says, you want to see my car? Yeah. It's usually because it looks bad. But I can honestly tell you in the last 5 years, I have not gone to a patient that says they're hurt, and to me they're credible, and I say, oh, by the way, let me look at that picture of the cars, both cars. Yeah. They're like, you don't want to see the picture of the car? I'm like, no, because it's not relevant to me. Like, the damage could have been there before. Yeah. Right? So the bias would be hey, I think I bought a used beater upper, and I just want to show this doctor that the rear of it's kind of messed up, and I think we're going to get him to believe it was from the crash, where it's really there before. And that's another joker card that the defense is going to have. Like, oh, did you know we have on file they kind of backed up into a tree 3 months ago, and those are the same pictures that we had. So that's the whole thing about bias from the medical provider, when the focus should be on the patient's complaints and their statement that they believe that they were hurt. They believe that they were hurt after this incident, whether it's a 2-mile-an-hour crash or a 20-mile-an-hour crash, with or without visible property damage. So the objective section is really key, and we're not going to talk about doctoring here, about temperature, blood pressure, all that stuff. This is not a medical podcast. This is something to just let the viewers and listeners know that providers that are excellent at what they do understand how to provide documentation by keeping it short and to the point, unbiased, credible, neutral. So it transitions from the subjective section, which has to be filtered, in my opinion, and it's an art. I think you as an attorney, if I see you in trial someday, I may be like, he is good, just a master. Versus someone that might be robotic, and you're like, I don't think that's going to go too well with anyone they're trying to convince their side of the story. Doctors, I think, in their medical records are no different.
I want to make a comment about the robotic thing. For all the chiropractors that are out there listening, I understand you guys have templates. Please stop copying and pasting the same records from one client to the next. Each person is separate, and they're a different human being, and they need to have their own set of records written for them. And I understand you're burnt, you feel frustrated, you've been doing this for a long time. A lot of PI attorneys are going to cut your bills, or that's how you feel. That doesn't excuse you copy and pasting records from one person to another. It really kills us. It kills the credibility of the client. It kills the credibility of the case. And I've had many providers that said that they won't even go back and change it, even when they know that they've done something like this. So please don't do our field a disservice and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that changing it would be in the form of addendum, right? Yeah. So, but some doctors that know that they got caught in the cookie jar, is like, yeah, well, let's just, I don't know if we need to do an addendum for like 5 of the 20 services there. It just looks like bad, right? Like lazy doctoring. So I actually I take a tremendous amount of pride in none of my records will look the same. And I know you may have clients that you've sent me over the years, and we won't talk about anything in detail, but I'm guessing that every single one of those records look different, very unique.
Yeah, of course.
Very unique.
It was tailored to the person. A good attorney is always going to read the records, but like you said, if I get 500 pages of records, I'm probably not going to read every single page. It's more anxiety than I can handle sometimes. But if you get good records, you get good soap notes, and you know what's going on there, you're good to go. And I also do want to remind me, when we're done talking about what soap notes mean, I want to talk about whether, a lot of times we don't even submit the final reports that are given in regards to cases. We just submit the SOAP notes, which I have found to actually be extremely beneficial. And let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we talked about credibility and neutrality from the provider. And let me just spin it this way. If a defense lawyer, and I have friends that are defense lawyers, they call me and say, hey, Dr. Choi, we trust your opinion. Do you mind going ahead and examining, one of these clients, whether it's my patient or not? Probably not. They're like, hey, we know that you're a chiropractor and we have these chiropractic records on a chiropractic patient. We just want a second opinion for you. We'll pay you to do an exam and do a report.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there's a fee. I'll do the exam, but if it's going to take me an hour, this is my hourly fee for my time.
Yeah.
And if it's going to take me an hour to write a report, this is going to be my hourly fee for my time. So this is how much you're going to probably have to cut me a check for. No defense lawyer would hesitate to pay me that. Now we flip it to the other side. How many lawyers do you know and do I know? Hey, doc, we need a narrative report at the end. And you're like, sure. And there you go. Copy and paste. And it's kind of, and I can see if you get narrative reports, why you wouldn't include it. Yeah. But it's one step better than garbage SOAP notes, right? Yeah. So the point is that to be outside of neutral and to be on the bias side is providing free service for your precious time, or you're saying to yourself or to the attorney, you're cheap. Your expertise is not there. Just copy and paste some narrative and just throw a generic thing out there. That's why I won't write a narrative report unless someone pays me for it. And then, of course, all the lawyers that I know on the plaintiff side, like, we don't pay for narratives. I'm like, well, then I'm not going to do one. Yeah. But they don't know that my SOAP notes will tell them everything that they need to do whatever they do as lawyers, supposedly a demand with very specific information in there and key points to make that claim credible, rather than why don't you look at these 500 pages too and then tell me if it's worth what I'm asking for? Yeah. So the credibility is huge, and not being biased is huge by not doing a narrative unless you want to pay me for it. But guess what I'm going to do, Joe? Yeah. I'm just going to copy and paste my key points in my SOAP notes and put in there, and that'll be an easy X amount of dollars, you know? So
I mean, I think that's a lot of people don't realize, but narrative reports, I just want to make a comment because I actually stopped putting narrative reports in our demand letters because of what you recommended. There's a couple things that are suggested to an adjuster when you see a narrative final report. One, final means to the adjuster, this person is better. They are now fully recovered. And because most chiropractors out there, they copy and paste the same thing into every report. They always copy the same sentence at the end. This person is at max medical improvement, MMI, which means that they've fully recovered and that they're not going to need any other treatment, or that they're good to go. Both of these things are not good for your case. They signify that the client is done and they're 100%, and also that they've achieved max medical improvement. Both of these things signify that this is the end and there's not going to be any future medical treatment. So we don't put that in there because many of these injuries last months, last years, and they are going to have to go back when they have a flare-up and their back hurts, or they bend over the wrong way, or they do the wrong things. And I know this myself because I've been in 4 car accidents. These injuries are not a specific box of time, and this is the only time I'm going to be hurt, and I'm not going to feel the pain again. It will happen again later, and when you send these final narrative reports, it kind of kills the case a lot of times for any future hope.
Well, as a practicing doctor, let's be fair with that. I mean, I understand on the plaintiff legal side, there's clients of yours that have chronic pain, but the medical records don't match it. So I feel bad for your clients that don't have doctors that understand that they're really not better. But to be fair, let's say there's 2 people in a car. One's a 40-year-old and the other is a high schooler that mom's driving. And let's say they get rear-ended, pretty decent impact, not much visible damage. But as you said, the cars are made of a lot of foam and cushion, and there's a pretty good force being put through there. But then the 40-year-old, well, why is it that after 2 months of treatment, she's still having neck issues? Well, there's medical reasons why that may be true, and we can talk about that when we get into the assessment section. Yeah. But that 15-year-old might be fine. And so I do believe there are some patients and clients of yours that may not have any future medical needs, and I think that's fine. And I think to be credible as a doctor, we have to just tell it as it is. And so there's a lot of patients that come to my office that are younger, that basically they say they're fine, and then their parents say, hey, by the way, they're really not telling me because they're intimidated to tell the doctor. They're not telling me they really still have pain. And obviously you as the attorney might call the minor and say, hey, just want to make sure you're okay. And they're like, I'm good. So I don't want to come across saying everyone is good to go, but you're right about final. The F word is not a good word. And the F word does imply we're good to go. But however, I will put in my records the truth where if the 15-year-old's like, hey, Dr. Choi, for the last 2 weeks since my last visit, I've been good. I've been playing sports, doing my thing. I said, patient states that they've been good for 2 weeks. Come back to see me if you have a flare up. So in a way it's final, but not final. However, if we have someone that's older, that has some medical issues, pre-existing, predisposing, or possibly traumatic from the crash that we can identify objectively, these are patients that more likely than not, or let's just say 99.99%, I think that's way more than likely than not, they're going to have need for long-term potential future medical care. And how we manage that and explain that to the patient, we'll probably talk about through the podcast regarding what are some of the injuries that are diagnosed to tell that patient this is what we believe is wrong with you. And then we'll get into the last section of the SOAP notes, which is the plan. What are the treatments that are reasonable and billings that are reasonable, which I think a lot of doctors across the board, medical doctors, chiropractic doctors, generally have no grasp on. It's out of control.
Yeah, so let's talk about the assessment part of the notes. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, in the SOAP note, when we get into, when we finish the subjective section, which is the patient's complaint, and the objective section, which is a focused exam on those subjective complaints for the doctor to document. We get into what's called the A part of the SOAP note, which is assessment. A lot of the doctor's records that you probably see is like, probably gives a big story about, hey, this is what I think, they need to go ahead and do this, and their prognosis is good, and da-da-da-da-da-da. But in my opinion, to keep it real simple, that assessment section is just what are the diagnoses wrong with them?
Got it.
Do they have post-concussive syndrome? And if so, what in the subjective section or objective section identifies post-concussive syndrome?
Yeah, do you want to go over maybe some of those tests that you do in the objective section so we can understand?
Yeah, so I'll give you a typical example. Someone has neck pain after a motor vehicle crash. And let's say they have neck pain, and at some point in their, between the collision and seeing you, they say, and Dr. Choi, every now and then I get numbness and tingling that runs down my arm and into some of my fingers. And then you're going to be like, okay, well, let's go ahead and test something. So we're going to go ahead and examine their neck, have them move their neck around. Most of the time, we're going to see their neck is not moving in all directions freely. If it's, let's say, a rear ender where their head might have been turned to the side a bit, because as we know, no one's ever straight ahead with 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock on their steering wheels.
Yeah, pro tip for the attorneys out there, make sure that you ask when you first sign up the client how they were sitting when the accident was. If they're sitting like this, if they're leaning over like this, if they're texting, because that's also a very real thing, because it's actually beneficial for your case if they're not sitting perfectly attended to, because most of the defense articles and their research is based off of sitting perfectly attended to, which helps them, but it's actually better for them not to be robots. So just make sure you ask those questions.
What's interesting about that is, in the thousands of cases that I've seen over the years, I actually, for me, as the attorney, as you're advising, ask your clients, where they were seated. For me as a doctor it's very interesting. I don't ask that anymore to patients, and this is why. 99.99% of patients don't remember. In other words, what they remember is what just happened here, or maybe they saw it coming. But when you ask, from a doctor's perspective, when you ask that patient, there's a pause. And they almost have to come up with an answer that they're not sure of, but they want to answer the doctor because we're asking them, and they want to seem like, okay, this is a legitimate injury. So back in my early career where I didn't know any better, I'm like, hey, by the way, you know, where was your hand? Where were your legs? How far in front were you seated? And, you know, I'd even go out to their cars and be like, hey, sit in your car right now and see what it is like you're driving. I'd be like, oh yeah, that they're definitely like 6 inches forward and kind of driving with their head up against their steering wheel. I don't do that anymore, because if you ask that patient, hey, by the way, tell me what was going on before the crash, it literally happens in milliseconds. Their brain sometimes doesn't register. You know, hear about the patients like, hey, tell me what happened. They're like, you know, I think I got hit from behind and I felt my head going forward. And you'll see some doctors going, patient states their head went forward.
Yeah.
It never goes forward. It goes backwards first when you get rear-ended, right? So there's a credibility issue right there. So that's why I avoid getting into that detail, Joe, because I believe most patients will try to come up with what's happening.
Yeah, instead of actually remembering how
it won't. It just happens so fast.
So it's more beneficial just to know that they weren't at 10 and 2 than specifically maybe getting the exact details.
Yeah, they might tell the lawyer, so the lawyer might be able to finagle some information talking to some adjuster in pre-litigation. But ultimately, you know, let's say in a litigation mode or something where, you know, someone's got to tell the truth. The truth is I kind of don't remember how I was sitting. I think I was sitting that way. Yeah. And I think most normal people, like jury members, if it's a good jury selection, be like, yeah, we get it. We don't, I mean, come on, we don't remember. We just know that something went wrong, and we don't even know if it was a car. I get some patients going, something just hit me.
Yeah, yeah. Some people, I mean, some people too. I mean, like they at least will remember what direction they were looking, which is beneficial. Sure. Yeah. And on a biomechanical, because I did a lot of mentoring and teaching when I was in the chiropractic program in biomechanics. So early in my career, I mean, if you saw some of my records, like the patient's head was turned to the left, and when they got rear-ended, their head went into, you know, hyper ipsilateral left rotation with hyper ipsilateral lateral flexion and hyper extension, causing A, B, C, and D. I mean, I became this biomechanics person, and now I just realize, now let's save it for the biomechanics experts if it has to go to that level. So an example, as we're talking about on assessment, would be, okay, this is the complaint, neck hurt, have some numbness and tingling down the arm. The objective findings is, okay, let's examine your neck. Let's do some orthopedic tests, limited, not a million of them, and see if there's anything that can reproduce that type of numbness or tingling. And usually if you do it right, you'll find something. But even if you don't, if the patient complains about it, they don't know that that might be a nerve impingement, right? They just think that maybe their hand hit something or their arm hit something. But from a medical perspective, we always have to assume the worst. There's some type of nerve damage, right? And we're not going to tell the patient, I think you might have hit your hand on something so it's numb. It's like, well, no, we think there's a neck injury because your neck kind of whipped around. And so what we do is, if we get all that examination procedures, whether the examination matches word for word, fact by fact, finding to finding that there might be some type of nerve root impingement, even if it's on a subjective complaint and our exam is negative and we believe that there may be some type of disc involvement, we're going to get, let's say, an MRI to identify that soft tissue injury, right? We hear from lawyers, well, doc, you know, it's just a soft tissue injury. I'm like, yeah, well, soft tissue injuries are brain injuries, disc injuries, ligament injuries, muscle injuries, and those are devastating in terms of chronic, acute, and then hopefully not, but it could lead to chronic pain. And so that would be an example of how we can get to a diagnosis of, we believe there may be a disc involved. And then we have to get an objective finding on top of our objective exam to identify a disc pathology. And then if we get it soon enough, Joe, not waiting 6 to 8 weeks, we can identify per the radiologist, not the chiropractor, because I'm not a radiologist. I'll call the radiologist and say, Dr. So-and-so, this person was involved in a crash. I know you're not supposed to know the details because a radiologist has to basically call it as it is, right? They're not supposed to know, you know, how old the patient is, even though it's on the records, but they're not supposed to be biased reading an MRI. No.
They're just supposed to call it as it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, because they call it as it is, and we have a great image, let's say a high quality image where the patient's not moving around, we prefer high Tesla, MRI scanners, because they're higher quality and the patient doesn't move as much. So you get a great scan on, let's say, a 3 Tesla machine in like 22 minutes, a great scan with plenty of slices to look at all the different angles. The radiologist would be like, oh, by the way, it seems like there's some inflammation going on here, and let's say this disc that's sticking out towards the left, they don't know the patient complained about neck pain with tingling down the left.
Yeah.
And they're even going to call the level. And so then when you backtrack your exam, you're like, whoa, those fingers are exactly the level where, that disc is protruding and irritating that nerve. Now we have, in my opinion, unequivocal evidence. I mean, it's kind of like it is what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone on either side of the coin would be like,
no, that's not.
Really?
Yeah, that's not good.
It's a done deal.
I agree with you. I mean,
right?
That's one thing that we, at least in my firm, we prefer if there is some MRIs that are requested in an accident, because even in the most minor of impacts, there's usually findings on an MRI that will help explain what is going on with the client. Otherwise, most of the time, the adjusters on their side, they think that what the client is saying and what the doctor is saying is subjective, and it's not objective. But an MRI is the most important, if not the strongest piece of objective evidence in a personal injury case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that that's a great topic we can talk about. But the Medicare guidelines, and you guys can just go to the Medicare website. But any physician, they don't say if it's a chiropractic physician or a medical physician. Any physician that believes that they need an MRI for diagnostic purposes, Medicare will approve it.
Got it.
It's almost like the irony is some of these insurance companies are sticklers, whether it's auto insurance and HMOs and PPOs, but now you got Medicare who's going to say if it's for diagnostic purposes. So if any doctor goes, you know what? I need to know that this might be the reason why you're having this neck pain. We need to get an MRI.
Yeah.
It's a done deal.
Yeah.
And then why we get pushback to get an MRI as a chiropractor from any lawyer, any insurance company behooves me. I'm just like, why? I'm putting my hands on someone. I don't want to hurt them. Yeah. An MRI is one of the ways I know that it may be even safe to treat that patient, especially in a neck injury. So there's a lot of patients, I'm not even going to touch their neck with my hands for manipulation unless I believe it's safe to do so, especially after trauma. This is different than someone that says, I had a stressful week, I woke up Saturday, and Monday they're like, my neck is still stiff from Saturday. Yeah, I'm going to examine them, and if there's no trauma, I'm not going to be ordering an MRI. Yeah. But if there's trauma involved, there are some guidelines in medicine that say, like they'll even say on the American College of Radiology, if you look that up, it's like ATV, accident. It's like, well, yeah. I mean, if they didn't break their neck, they'll say MRIs are usually appropriate, right? Yeah. So there's really no guideline out there that will say not appropriate. Yeah. They'll say usually appropriate or usually not appropriate. And one of the ways we would come in a deposition or trial, be like, I am a chiropractor needing to provide treatment for this patient. And I believe for diagnostic purposes and safety measures, I want to know if I can help this patient, or they may need to go to a neurosurgeon or an orthopedic spine surgeon or a pain management doctor if my treatments aren't the right thing for this patient. So as a chiropractor, unlike a lot of the other ones that you may have run into, I don't hold on to my patients for dear life. No. I send them out if they need it.
No. I agree with you entirely.
I send them out. That's the best thing for the patient. And so we do love making sure that we have the right diagnoses, right? Yeah. And the old school thinking, and I did some research on this, which is like almost 100 years old now, is whiplash, right? When I get a patient that comes to my office and says, hey, doc, I have whiplash. I said, and I don't want to get too technical, but in my mind, I'm like, that's a 100-year-old term. Yeah. Whiplash is the mechanism of injury. Yeah. If you Google whiplash, there's going to be a code that talks about cervical sprain. I mean, we could probably do it as you listen to this podcast. Yeah. Whiplash, cervical sprain. Yeah. An ankle sprain, like a cervical sprain, the SPRAIN, deals with a ligament injury. So yes, there's tons of ligaments that run throughout our neck that help stabilize the neck. And yes, there can be ligament injuries.
Yeah.
But if you say there's whiplash and you diagnose it with a cervical sprain, and you don't identify the level of that, which could be grade 1, which is not a big deal. It's going to heal on their own. And you probably get pushback from insurance companies that say, oh, the doctor said it was a cervical sprain. That may be 5 visits or no visits, you know, especially if the car doesn't look wrecked. It's like, you don't need any treatment for that. And if the car flips over a few times, they're like, all right, we'll give you 20 visits for that, which is kind of like inconsistent, right? But the diagnosis. But there's different grading. You could have a grade 2 where that ligament is partially torn. And then you can have a grade 3 that if you can identify it objectively, we can say that there's something not right about this ligament that's causing instability in that spine. And if you can link it to maybe some incident, I mean, it's devastating for the patient because it's like if you twist your ankle and you lose that ligament, now your whole ankle joint is going to be loose to some degree for the rest of your life. Right. And before you know it, your whole ankle joint looks like an 80-year-old when you're 40.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And like the ICD codes that you use in these reports are extremely important, right? And like one of the things that I've learned is like the way that the doctor writes the codes in the report is very important, right? I've learned that ranking them from the worst injury, you know, to the least imperative injury is a good way of doing it. And on top of that, you know, putting the sprain code or the MCX sprain code or whatever the number is, I don't know it off the top of my head, is not beneficial a lot of times. Many of the times it is ligamentous instability is the proper code that they should be using.
Yeah, I mean, that's an hour podcast in itself regarding ligament instability, but definitely, you know, that's kind of easier to objectify if you take certain x-rays at certain angles or you use like video fluoroscopy where they do like motion x-rays. I mean, there's a lot of practitioners out there that find ligament injuries and but then you got to also tie it to the collision, right? Because who's responsible for that? If it was caused by their insured, if you can show evidence through the history exam and the testing that you do to show there's instability and there's no other explanation other maybe some type of a car crash that might have caused it. I think that's a valid, great way of documenting the proper injuries. But then again, it's all about causation, right? There are some injuries of the disc that you can show through objective findings, but we have some practitioners out there that say everyone with a disc issue that's 40 years old must have been caused by the car crash, and that's simply not true. I mean, that would be bad medicine, right? However, we have someone with no prior injuries to their neck, and we have 3 bulging discs in their neck, but one of them is way out there like 3 millimeters and the rest are 1. I don't see how that could be normal.
I understand.
One of those things are sticking out more than the other, and they have no prior injuries to their neck. There's not one should be sticking out 200% more than the others. And I may call it out and say, I informed the patient that this is not something that should be there unless there's something else that could have caused it. So we kind of indirectly say that this is probably from the car crash. Even though we can't prove it, we're going to say more likely than not, or with medical certainty, that this is not something considered normal for a 40-year-old.
Got it. And many times what you'd consider normal, they'll call it degenerative changes. A lot of people will categorize it under that.
But if you have a doctor that uses a high-quality image and good quality imaging without blur, and a high Tesla magnet strength, and the patient gets it done in a reasonable time before an injured disc can resorb, that's another reason why you can't wait too long, because I've seen so many patients in second crashes, all of a sudden that 3 millimeter herniated disc is now like 2 millimeters, and you're like, what just happened there? They just got another crash. Well, what happened was the first one probably caused the injury, or else it wouldn't have changed so much, right? And then the irony is if they get into a second crash, just because it's 2 millimeters instead of 3, we don't know if that went back to 0 and all of a sudden the second crash went to 2. So, I mean, if you want to look at objective findings, the best thing would have been is get the MRI after the first crash right away, get it after the treatment to show that it may have resorbed because it was an injury versus pre-existing. Then when you get into another crash and do the MRI again, it shows it went from 0 to 2. Now you have a completely apportioned second crash to be like, hey, what other reason did it go from 3 to 0 to 2? Someone's responsible for that. So that's why MRIs also are very important for me as a doctor to be like, tell my patient eye to eye, here's what's going on with all, unless something else happened to your neck, something's going on here with your neck from these crashes or something else,
Yeah, and another tip that I wanted to give, something that actually Dr. Choi taught me, and I've taken settlements that I've been offered, very low like amounts, like 30 grand, and then I end up settling for the 100,000 later, is if your client is still in pain 7-8 months later, and let's say that there's a gap in treatment, the way that you can overcome this gap in treatment is send them back for another MRI. Show that they have not fully healed from this accident. I know that the defense will argue all day, no, they should have been better, they've gotten their treatment, they've been through the myriad of it, but sometimes the client does not heal, and that's okay. And like Dr. Choi's pointed out, it's not every client is the same. So if they are still in pain, and even if there's a gap in treatment, you overcome that gap by sending them back to get an objective piece of evidence, which is the MRI, and then you show that there's still a bulge, there's still herniations, that they're still in pain, and there's a reason why they're in the pain. So I appreciate that tip that you taught me.
You're welcome. Yeah, what I love to do is after I do my conservative treatment, as long as it's safe to do their adjustments and provide them therapies, I love that if there is a gap like that, let's say you have a client, you're like 3 months later, 4 months later, you're like, hey, by the way, how you doing? They're like, my neck is still kind of hurting.
Yeah.
What I love is because they've already probably seen some specialists, whether they're a pain management doctor or an orthopedic surgeon, I love that they would go back to their specialist and they're like, let's go ahead and see what's going on and get that MRI from the specialist. And I think that's credible.
I agree.
Because I don't do surgeries or do pain management injections, the chiropractor may not be the right person to order that MRI 7 months later, because there's not much I can do for it anyways. I love that if you send it to the specialist, they do the best for their patient and say, okay, well, you may need some pain management, but before I go in there, since it's been like 7 months since your last MRI, let me see what I'm dealing with here, because why would I want to inject an area that looks normal?
I agree.
Right?
100%. So let's move on. So we are still in the assessment part of the SOAP notes, or have we completed with this?
Yeah, those are just some samples of how we can identify certain injuries. We could just talk real briefly. There's a lot of patients that get T-boned or they have shoulder pain.
Yeah.
And I've had multiple, and I got a couple lawyers that send me cases where there's going to be a family doctor or their HMO doctor being like, oh, your shoulder's fine, get physical therapy for a few weeks. And ironically, maybe they even got physical therapy. And then they go back to their primary and they're like, okay, well, take these medicines.
Yeah.
And the lawyers have maybe repeatedly seen this pattern where they're like, well, we need to find out what's wrong. And it's very rare that some of these other doctors, not say that it doesn't happen, will just want to get that MRI right off the bat. And for me, if I have a patient that says, I slept funny and I wasn't in a car crash and my shoulder feels funny, or I threw a baseball with my son for 3 hours, but I didn't actually throw it out, I just kind of felt sore the next day, I'm not getting an MRI of their shoulder. Yeah. But if someone says to me, I got T-boned and my shoulder hurts, I'm going to do an exam, but I'm not going to torture that person. I'm going to be like, move your arm around. They're like, well, I'm not going to perform 10 orthopedic shoulder exams. I mean, I can go to all my medical textbooks and be like, you got to do all these tests. I'm getting an MRI because what if the MRI shows that it's normal? Now they just have a shoulder joint that just needs some rehab and PT, but more often than not, we're going to have a tear, some type of rotator cuff tear, partial or full. And what I see a lot is some labral tears or cartilage tears that they don't fix themselves. Muscle tears, that T word is no good of the cartilage or the shoulder, because we just don't have those things healing on their own. Like you cut your finger and it's not that deep. You put a Band-Aid on and put some pressure on it. It might be a little scarred up, but you're not going to need someone to sew it up. So we get those MRIs done, and ironically, it's because no one else orders the MRI. And I've had multiple cases where someone has a shoulder issue when they get T-boned or even rear-ended when, supposedly their hand was on the steering wheel relaxing at a light, and then their shoulder hurts right afterwards. And sometimes that's the priority with the assessment. So it's not just a neck injury. I agree with you. We as doctors have to focus on the chief complaint of that patient. If they say, doc, I can't move my shoulder, my neck's sore, and let's say I have to order an MRI and we can only get one, well, the neck comes second. We got to get that shoulder taken care of.
Well, that's the one thing also I respect about you, and you understand this. It's like a lot of times chiropractors will want to hoard the treatment to just them. They're like, no, I can fix everything, right? Or they won't recommend them out to a specialist because they think their bills are going to get cut, whatever the reason may be. And a lot of times clients are not getting the treatment that they need. As an attorney, yes, I am now pretty experienced enough where I can talk to the client and hear what the injuries are and make recommendations for the types of doctors that they should see. But a lot of times, if the chiropractor is not recommending that they see a specialist, they see an ortho, they see pain management, or they go to somebody that can help them with these other types of injuries, the client's never seeing those type of medical providers. And so I respect the fact that you see when other types of injuries are something that you might not be able to fix and sending them out that way. You guys almost like quarterback the cases.
Yeah, and part of it is, Joe, is that I've seen so many patients that have gone to their other doctors, and they're brilliant doctors. I mean, some of these primary doctors are friends of mine, brilliant. Yeah. It's just that when it comes to, you got hit by someone in another car, it's kind of like they go into freeze mode, and they go into extra conservative mode, you know. And for me, because it might be done on a lien, and someone else supposedly will be responsible for paying, and I have lawyers that are going to take care of business and not play games. I'm excited to get the testing that they need, because the patients kind of look to me and go, well, thank you. I mean, they actually say thank you on the first day. They're like, thank you. I appreciate you looking out for me as number one. And to me, there's no better feeling that whether I get paid a penny or not, that's what it's all about, because nobody else will do it for them.
No, agreed.
Nobody will do it.
We depend on your guys' guidance a lot of times. And, just to comment also, like, we're in a digital age right now, and the pandemic has made it 1,000 times worse. We're not seeing people face to face. When people at least used to come into my office, I'm seeing the client. I can kind of tell what's in pain. Maybe I can see that their shoulder's hurting, maybe their lower back is hurting. But a lot of times clients don't even want to meet on a Zoom meeting. So I don't get to see them. I don't get to make any assessments. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but at least like I could have a general idea. I could see them limping or see what was causing them some pain. So we're really depending a lot of times on the chiropractor to be that initial point of, this is what's going on, this is what needs to potentially be done, and they need to look at this, and this.
And the chiropractors, in my opinion, need to be trained. They have to understand that it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of rethinking. It's almost a different paradigm, right? You need to get your notes done on a very personal, individual level, and it's not going to be so easy anymore. No. You need to actually spend time with your patients and focus on them and not run a high volume mill.
Yeah.
And you need to learn, because you need to unlearn what you thought was, okay, let's just treat, and wait for payment. I think some of the doctors have gotten so accustomed to the abuse out there that for someone to come to them and say, if you really take the time to do it right, you'll get taken care of on that bill and be respected as a provider and get a lot more referrals, because no one else is going to do it for their clients, and your own patients will send you more of their family and friends. And that's why I have a referral only based practice with personal injury, and I'm very successful doing it. I mean, just a lot of business comes my way because I do it right, and not everyone needs 3 months of treatment. I got some patients 1 week, 2 weeks, and they need to go off to some other doctor, and that's it. But then also there's patients with chronic problems that get referred back to me by their specialists, and we maybe need to treat them for 6 months to a year, all per the team of doctors to help your clients or our patients get the care that they need. So that's why very few cases are similar looking. Very different, very unique.
No cases. I mean, once again, sometimes, our job can get kind of monotonous, but the injury is never the same to the person. They're just at different points in their life. They have different strengths. They have different weaknesses. And so you guys take the right approach.
And one thought that I had here was, you're doing the right thing as a doctor when the patient goes, I was in a car accident 5 years ago and they never did anything for me like this.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm not going to bash the other doctor, but I'm like, it doesn't shock me. No. And I'm sure when you send your clients to me or some of the doctors that are well trained to be neutral, spend the time with the patient, I'm sure your clients come back to you and say, hey, Joe, you're awesome. And the doctors that you send me to are just awesome. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, I mean, the clients that I work with, and my clients specifically, they always say thank you because they know that they're in good hands with the doctors. The bottom line is you're going to see and talk and speak to my client more than I am ever going to throughout the duration of the case. Like, it's going to happen. You're seeing them weekly, you're seeing them regularly, you're speaking to them, you're seeing them. And so The chiropractic office is almost an extension of me and my firm. If they are not good and they are not great at what they do and they don't provide good service, it makes me look bad and it makes my firm look bad. My client's never going to come back to me again. They're never going to want to work with us. And it's all like the doctors are such an integral part of what we do and how we do it that we have to make sure that we're working with the right people. And you guys are definitely the right people.
And I have a question for you, if you don't mind me asking, is when we see out there as chiropractors the abuse of all providers, treated a certain way, and let's say I'm doing the things that I'm saying I'm doing, and all the doctors that I teach, and even some of your friends that are doctors that might not follow what I teach, but they're still good people. Why is it that, in your opinion, that these lawyers just simply don't seem to care no matter what we do? It's almost like I can work hours and hours on getting these records done right. Send it to, any attorney, whether it's you or someone that knows me or doesn't know me, and the response of what they do with it can be just as disastrous as if I sent them 500 pages of stuff they're not going to read.
I think that there's probably it's a multi-pronged answer for me on my end. First is that some attorneys are just not very good at their job, right? So they're taking settlements, and that could be for a myriad of different reasons. They're either taking lowball settlements, they're just not working up the cases, and a lot of attorneys, they are at the point in their careers where they're only looking for that $1 million case. So on most PI cases, they're not $1 million case. They are 15 to 25 value cases because that's what the policy limits are for most people in California. So the attorney goes, I'm not going to spend all this time negotiating and working up the value on this case. I'm looking for the $1 million case. So they would rather make the chiros eat shit, you know what I mean, in this negative way, and just ask them for a huge reduction than to do their job and work up these cases and get them, the value that they deserve, or negotiate the way that they should, or even litigate a case that might be low value because it's better for the client and it's better for the doctor. So that's one reason. Secondly, I think that a lot of chiros, from in the past, no one in your network, they sometimes bill extremely high, right? And that's something that doesn't correlate well with the adjusters. It doesn't correlate well with going to litigation, because when you bill too high, what happens is it creates, like you said, discredibility, or there's no credibility. And so when there's no credibility, the case then gets low value when it comes to settlement. And so when we get low value, it still goes back to the first thing that we always ask people to cut is the chiros, because they're billing at $250 a visit, which is too much. And so we can't get any credibility with the adjusters, so it trickles down to resulting in a really bad settlement. So those, in my mind, are probably the two biggest reasons as to why the chiros are consistently asked to take these major cuts. But at the same time, there's just attorneys that they've been trained since they were younger, that when they go to the chiros, it's okay to ask them for a 70%, 65%, which is obviously wrong. But when I worked at, I'll be honest, I worked at a mill firm when I was younger. I worked at one of those firms. I'm not going to name what they are, but I worked at a mill firm, and it was standard in their lien reduction letter. They would automatically input it with a 75% lien reduction request to the chiropractors. And I think it just became kind of standard for many years in the industry that the attorneys would just ask for that. And so the chiros just learned to kind of take it for a while. And I never understood why we were asking for such a reduction. I felt like if they're doing good treatment and it's worth the money that they're treating, why are we asking for a 75% reduction from a chiropractor? And now we don't do that. When we work with people, the max we're asking for usually is 15, 25%, but that's typically because if we're not getting a settlement that is fair to the client or fair to everyone around. But if it's a bad case where I might ask, so every once in a while, of course, I'm going to ask a chiropractor for a 50% reduction, but it's typically because it's Prop 213 or there's something drastically wrong with the case. But I've told the chiropractor very early on, usually in the first 2 phone calls, hey, high percentage chance we're going to have major issues with this case. And so none of the chiros are ever mad at me. They knew we were going to do a 50% reduction. I'll cut my fees too. A lot of attorneys will not cut their fees. We have a rule at our firm. The client always gets $1 more than us no matter what. And I know a lot of attorneys look at me really strange when I say that, but I don't make my ends meet off these low value cases. I would rather have a client that's happy The chiropractor's happy, and I have a better relationship with them in the long run because people will come back to me and know that I'm that kind of person and I didn't screw them over $300, over $1,000. And I think I just kind of take a little bit of a different approach.
You have an amazing testimony, and I know this is kind of turning around me asking you a question, but I'm totally curious because you're a good guy, Joe, and I think you're going to have a continued success and a wonderful career, and great respect from the chiropractors that I teach and train, because it's rare to find lawyers like you. My question would be this, is if you were ingrained in that system, what broke you out of that mentality? Is it just, I'm a good person, I don't want to do bad stuff? Or is it, I finally met some people that I respect as my mentors, whether they're doctors or lawyers, and saying, there's a better way of doing things, let's do things right?
I think that it comes down to teaching people, right? Like that's part of the reason that I started that networking group, but it's teaching other attorneys there is a better way to do this. There is a better way, because look, not only when like your team fixes, instead of doing these crazy high bills, knowing that they're going to get cut, I would rather get the bills that are 170, 180, that I know I will get paid by the adjuster and will get paid the right way. Not only did we raise the value of the cases, I'm paying the doctors better, and we're getting better settlements for the clients. So it takes this collaborative work back and forth, which I think a lot of people, chiropractors see other chiropractors as, competition. A lot of attorneys see other attorneys as competition. I don't see that as the case. There's over 70 million people in the state of California. There's plenty of accidents and things that we can work on. I would rather work together collaboratively to raise the bar. But the reason that I left these high volume firms is at these high volume firms, they're giving the attorneys so much work. I don't even know the names of some of my clients when they would call in because I was so busy just trying to get it in and get it settled. And it's all about quotas, and it's all about treating the client like a number and a paycheck until you get to that $1 million case, that $10 million case. All those low value cases, they mean nothing. And when you're treating people like nothing, it reflects. And that's why all these firms, they spend 150 grand on marketing a month, because that's the only way they get business. Their friends are not telling their friends about these attorneys and referring them to these companies. At my firm, 90% of our cases is word of mouth referrals. And it's because people said, we did a good job, we took our time, and we treated them well. So once again, I think it might be that I am just a good person. I take a different approach, because there are attorneys out there where client is a paycheck, we need to get the paycheck, we have to move the needle forward, and we just got to keep moving the needle forward until we make that next paycheck. And there's just some firms out there that give us really bad names, and they give attorneys really bad names the same way that, some chiropractors give other chiropractors really bad names.
Sure. No, that's great. It's great to hear that perspective. Meeting with lawyers and knowing some excellent lawyers over the last 10 out of my 20 years, it's still an exception rather than the rule that the lawyers will value the chiropractor as the quarterback to do things right. They still don't understand the concept of everything needs to be reasonable and better settlements will happen. But it seems like that's the trend now, and it's not the opposite. The opposite's an extreme. There's a $15,000 policy. We need to get $15,000 in medical bills, and let's just prorata everyone. And it's getting more extreme. I've been consulting some doctors that are like, these lawyers are sending me these breakdowns that are saying, due to the high medical bills of $25,000, we were able to secure a $15,000 policy limit. Here's your 15 cents on the dollar. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
How did that just happen?
I think that so many chiropractors got screwed over the years that there's kind of this collaborative waking up. And also what's going on, from my understanding, is the insurance companies are paying so little to chiropractors for the insurance work that most of them are trending towards lien and cash basis. And since more and more people are trending towards this, it's kind of like an entire shift throughout an entire genre where people are getting wiser and they're getting better, and they're realizing we either are going to do this together, or like you said, those couple of chiropractors that get their records subpoenaed and they show that they do things differently for PI cases versus normal cases. So I think it's an entire generational thing, and I'm hoping with the new generation of PI attorneys, things are going to change, right? We're going to collaboratively work better. We're going to all raise the bar. And, with the defense, they have all these unlimited resources where they spend all this money getting data on us and getting all this stuff. We're now in the digital age, and I think COVID is going to actually help PI attorneys go into the next round of like helping each other out, because people are coming together. You were were on the TBI Med Legal webinar, which was amazing. And like, that's one thing where I'm getting education on a regular basis, which just wasn't available before a year ago, right? And so I think it's just everybody's trending towards this, but it took a long time and a lot of wrongdoings and a lot of people getting walked over for a long time before things made any changes.
And you know, one of the reasons why I do 1000% sleep, eat, and drink this is because some of my friends are high-level defense lawyers or former ones, and they say, if everyone did things ethically like this and by the book, we would just tell our bosses to just pay it.
Dude, one thing I can tell you is this. Ever since I started working with you guys, before I started working with you guys, 90% of my conversation with adjusters are, your treatment's unreasonable, your bills are too high, we're not going to pay that. I have not had that conversation in over a year now. I literally have not had an adjuster once tell me, oh, why'd you get that MRI? Why'd you do this? Why are your bills like this? That's not a conversation that I have anymore. And just like the amount of stress that I have lowered in my life, because that was the most stressful thing in my life, was talking to adjusters, explaining why the chiro did this, why they did this treatment, why the bills are this high, it's gone. And when that's gone, that's half of our job. If you're providing reasonable meds, reasonable treatment, and you're doing what's actually right for the client, the adjuster, they look at it and they go, okay, I don't really know, we'll just try to nickel and dime them, but at the end of the day, they end up paying what's reasonable most of the time if you're going to keep pushing and doing what's right for your client.
And you being around the industry and you've been in practice and you've known many mentors that have been, and I've always thought this, like, in all the years of personal injury, how come this system hasn't been done yet?
I think it's because of something that I pointed out so much earlier. I think, well, you pointed out, chiros are so burnt that they hate other chiros, that they're frustrated. They want to keep all the money to themselves, the very little money that they're getting. And so everybody just looked at each other so adversarial, right? And I think that people are taking a different approach now. They're seeing people as compatriots in justice. We're working together with each other. And I think chiros also realizing, you know, if you get other doctors involved, it's actually good for my case to have an MD look at it. And it's just, you know, having these realizations. I think digital age is a big part of it, right? People are getting more and more access to information that they didn't have before. There's probably a lot of reasons, but it's good. There's definitely a trend towards things getting better, but all my mentors have always told me, the doctor you use is the most important. The doctor you use is the most important. If the doctor is not good, you have no case, because it's all about credibility. And if you can't build that credibility, you can't build a case.
Great. And I truly believe that chiropractors listening to this podcast, you know, as a chiropractor, you know, this is the real deal. If you're willing to put in the work, there's plenty of room for chiropractors to grow and learn this stuff throughout the whole state. Yeah. I get emails and texts from lawyers all the time saying, hey, I got a new client in this city, you know, do you have anyone even 30 minutes away? And I'm like, you know, I'm trying to reach out and find people, but it's so difficult for me to find doctors that are willing to just be like, okay, let's go ahead and turn the cheek and do it a different way. I think they've been so abused that it's almost like, this is not sit well with me. This is not right. This is not going to work. This is, if I do everything like that, then I'm going to get cut even more. So instead of getting 100 a visit, I'm going to be getting 40 a visit.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense for anyone. It's not fair to anyone.
It's not fair, but in their mindset, they're not willing to be like, okay, let's revamp and really do this right. So I need a lot of lawyers on board.
Dude, it's tough too. Like, I want to speak to the attorneys out there. Look, if you're asking a medical provider who saw your client multiple times a week, every week, to cut his bills by 70%, you better be taking a pay cut. Like, for you to not take $1 pay cut, and I understand we're attorneys, and probably a lot of attorneys out there are going to hate me for this, but if you're not willing to take a pay cut when you're asking somebody else to take an 80% pay cut, there's either something morally wrong with you, or there better be something really wrong with your case, and you explain this to the doctor before this happened, because it's not fair to ask everybody else to get paid less when you are not getting paid any less. And I get it, we have attorney's liens, we're entitled to our money first, and the law will always protect us, but it's not fair. You got to think about that for a moment and see what that also translates to the doctors, because guess what? doctors, remember, they're not going to want to work with you anymore. They're going to tell you their friends about you, and you're going to get a bad reputation. And you have to remember that your reputation is everything, especially in a field where you're basically asking the doctor to work for free until they get paid. I understand we're the same way, but it's, you know, for them, it's they're doing weekly touch-ups with their client. They're consistently seeing them. They're physically touching them. They are a representation of you. You don't want to piss off the one person that's representing you, because that's the worst thing you could possibly do. Sorry, I know it's kind of my soapbox for a second.
No, I appreciate that. And I do believe that the trend is there already, because I've been getting a lot of referrals from lawyers that I don't know. And my office staff will call them and be like, hey, by the way, we've never worked with you in 20 years. How do you know about us? And it's going to usually be, well, I have lawyers that have vouched for you. Your documentation, you're very reasonable. You're a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay? And we want to send clients to you.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, the future of, you know, PI is, you know, really value who you work with and stick to it. And for you to actually ask for a reduction and have to take some out of your own is rare now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So for those lawyers listening saying, okay, I think we'll do that. We think Joe's a good guy and I'm a good guy too, or a good girl.
Yeah.
I think if you do things the right way, those conversations are rare, would you say?
Yeah, no, 100%. It's, you know, we're changing as time goes on. You know, make sure you find good doctors. Make sure you find people you trust. I mean, remember this, guys. Like, every client's different. Every person's different. You want to really send people that your clients to people that you trust and you know are going to do a good job. Luckily, there are networks like this. Like, otherwise, like what I was doing before is I would go to each chiropractic office. I would vet the chiros. I would talk to them. I knew their personalities. I like did a good job of like creating this like own like spreadsheet of like people that I knew and the personalities. But I've kind of thrown that by the wayside, because even though those doctors were good and knew what they were doing, their records, which we've talked about here, were not up to par many of the times. And when you from an attorney start telling the chiros and doctors how to do their jobs, they don't like it a lot of times. And I don't want to tell someone how to do their job. I would rather somebody is trained, they already know what's going on, and it's coming from someone that is a medical provider so that they can give them the right information. So once again, if you need any medical assistance or help with chiropractors, please reach out to the Ichthus Injury Network. They're always available, and Dr. Choi is great, and he'll talk your ear off for weeks and months, and we're the same way, so that's why I think we get along really well. But what I want to do is I want to end the podcast right now. Dr. Choi, if you can you please let everybody know how they can get in contact with you, best email, best phone, website, and the way that they can reach you.
Great. Website, www.ICHTHYS.com, ICHTHYS injurynetwork.com. The email would be ichthusinjury@gmail.com. The phone number would be 1-855-ICHTHYS, ICHTHUS. And my personal cell number is 714-606-5330. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to chat and expand more on some of this information that we covered today.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thanks, everyone, for chiming in today. I think probably at some point I'll have Dr. Choi back on here again. We'll talk about some more tips and ways that we can help you guys out. This was great. Thank you very much. This is us signing out. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. Thank you.